Well, more recent residents of our area, when the subject of local colleges and universities comes up, they think about the Evergreen State College, South Puget Sound Community College, and St. Martin's University in Lacey. And each one of them have a unique history in Thurston County, but the one with the deepest roots is the one we're highlighting today, St. Martin's University. Our speaker today is a monk at St. Martin's Abbey and is no stranger to us here at the Schmidt House. Father Peter Tynan has attended 2 of our local history conferences here in recent years. And at the first one, he brought with him some wonderful artifacts from the school that were very impressive. We almost didn't want to touch them because they're valuable. I mean, there's something. But from 2002 to 2007, Father Tynan organized the archives for St. Martin's, saving many historical records from being lost in the process of his work. So we appreciate him so much for that, too. He currently serves as University Chaplain, and we appreciate him very much. And the title of his presentation is rather intriguing to me, and that's Nothing Worthwhile is Easy, an Early History of St. Martin's University. So let's have a warm Schmidt House welcome for Father Peter Tynan.
Very nice of you. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is that I come to history as an archivist. You know, I went to my undergraduate is in Management of Information Systems, which now would be called Systems Administrator, and I went to library school because I wanted to be a systems administrator at a library. But when I was an undergraduate, I thought that wouldn't it be cool to learn Latin? And when I got to my first library job, it actually happened at the interview, okay? I show up, and it's like, oh, I'm so excited to be interviewing for the systems administrator here at Marquette University's library. And they looked at me, no, Mr. Tynan, we saw in your resume that you can read Latin. Yeah? Could you read this can you translate this for us? Okay. And I did so. It says, congratulations, Mr. Tynan. We'd like to offer you a position in our archives. And once you become an archivist forever, it controls your destiny. So that's how a guy who's supposed to be a geek ends up working in history. And that's okay, because I come to you mostly as a storyteller. I love telling stories. And part of my job in my line of business is every Sunday morning I have to basically take a story that may seem a little bland and bring it to life, blow some spirit into it, if you may say. And that's what I want to do for the history of St. Martin's, because it's a very easy thing to say, yeah, a bunch of German-speaking monks came out from Minnesota and started St. Martin's in 1895. Thank you. Now then. But nothing is that simple. And nothing is that easy. And so let us enter into the story of how this got started and all the things that were going on around it. Because I think in doing so, you'll see that, well, it's my hope that each and every one of you will now start asking more questions of all those simple facts that you might have memorized in high school, because there's so much life behind everything. What we see as mere facts involve people, and wherever there's a person, there's a story. Trust me. And so let us begin with St. Martin's story. Now, the monks were not initially invited to come here to Olympia. In fact, the first invitation came out of Oregon. Archbishop Gross in 1881 and his assistant, who is then Father Edward O'Day, that's the second person there, later Bishop of Seattle, these two got together and they came up with a scheme. They were thinking, we have all these German-speaking immigrants out here, and, it's kind of hard to get anyone but an Irish priest out here. How are we going to do this? I know how we're going to do this. Monks. And let us, just to square things away, invite not one group of monks to come out and consider starting a monastery out here in the Willamette Valley, but two groups of monks. And let's not let them know that they're both being asked, because then we can get both to come here. And so monks were invited from Elseldine in Switzerland, the Swiss congregation, and then from the good German monks in Minnesota, St. John's. So, they went out and got on took a steamer down to San Francisco. That's how you got around. You took a steamer to San Francisco. Then you got on the Intercontinental Railroad and then came up and talked with the then abbot of St. John's, Abbot Alexius Edelbrook. Say, hey, we need some help out here. And I know that you want to serve the German Catholics out here because, let's face it, those Germans, they want to hear preaching in their own language. They're tired of these Irish priests out here. They want good, solid German priests. And Alexis is going, yeah. And so he decides, I want to go out because I've heard so much about the Pacific Northwest. And so he goes out. But by the time he gets there, it's kind of that time of year. And it is raining all the time. And he's like, and he got a little bit of cabin fever back when people, were living in cabins. This is 1881. I mean, a good time out here because everything was booming back then. But, it just, he just said, well, I'm sure he didn't say it like this, but he probably just said, this place just isn't any good. It's just, we can't stay here. But I tell you what, Archbishop Gross and Father O'Day, they were smart because one of the groups did stay. And so now in Oregon, we have Mount Angel Abbey. And they got started down there. But our group of guys said, it rains too much here. This place is a frog pond. We're going home. And so that was our first initial try. But, history moves on. And then a second invitation came. Now in 1891, Father Heilbus of St. Leo's Parish up in Tacoma, it's still there, invited the monks to come out to Washington State to minister to the German-speaking Catholics. Because, hey, German-speaking Catholics didn't change in 10 years. They still want their own German priests. And they were working in Tacoma, trying to, build a life for themselves. And they were just, they wanted their own parish. And so another message was sent out to St. John's. And this time, St. John's had a new abbot, an abbot who didn't quite have the memories of all the rain in the Pacific Northwest. Abbot Bernard accepted the invitation and came out to visit Tacoma. And then he started to meet with the German Catholics out there, and he started talking with them, and he became impressed because he saw in them a desire to get something new started. And they wanted to start their own parish. They were beginning to put together their money to build up their own church. And the abbot said, this is a wonderful thing. And, he was there kind of in the late spring when the roses were blooming. See, weather makes a difference. So if you want to impress somebody, don't have them come in the winter. Let them come once the rainy season ends. Because he saw all these roses, and he just thought, this is such a beautiful city. You are going to name your new parish Holy Rosary, And so that's how Holy Rosary Parish got started, and that's how it got its name, for all the beautiful roses. And so he went back and said, I will be back and I will be sending you monks and a few sisters to teach. So, in August of 1892, Father Wolfgang Steinkogler, I said German priest, right? Okay, how much more German can you get than that? Was sent by Abbot Bernard to find a suitable location for, for a monastery in a school out here. And there's Father Wolfgang. Because we sent out a person to take care of the parish, but they were thinking big. We said, we don't only just want to do parishes. We are monks, and we like to think big. And so let's look into finding a right place for us. Now, the first choice on coming out to Washington State was a location between Tacoma and Seattle. Because, it's between the two big cities, and they can draw from both. And it just seemed like the great location for them. But there was a problem. The land value was between $100 and $1,000 per acre. I know, chump change to us, right? But you have to multiply all those numbers by 25, and then you'll get an idea. And also, as I'll explain in just a second, when monks buy land, they buy big chunks of land. So you have to multiply that then again by about 500 or 700. And you see, it's a bit of money. Now, since they were looking for a big parcel of land, it just cost too much. So Father Wolfgang decided to turn his attentions south. And he came down to the vicinity of Chehalis and Centralia, which were then two thriving cities. Because what was going on here? Lumber. It was a lumber explosion. The late 1880s was a boom time out here. And there was a lot of money to be made. And so things were looking up, up, up in those days. And that boom was still happening in 1892. Now, when he was down there, he was persuaded by someone to go ahead and purchase 160 acres of property in Dryad. Dryad? Is it still there? I know. It's kind of on on some maps, on some property maps. But as you can see, we have a picture of the railroad station there. And they came, and he was able to get that land for the cheap price of $25 an acre. Now, there is a rumor, our abbot Adrian, who was our abbot in the early 80s, he came and told me, Father Peter, they paid for that in gold. Ooh, I know. I tell you, there's us monks, we don't necessarily take a vow of poverty, mind you. We hold all things in common. So I guess we hold gold in common too, so there you go. So they bought this land, which, Father Wolfgang, he was thinking, well, you got to buy something. But I tell you what, this place is going to make a good farm. But it's not really a great place for a school. And that was his idea. Now then, you see this very poorly made graphic here. This is me on Microsoft Paint. As I said, I know computers, but that's just in systems administration, not in art. Now then, why did we need to have such a big place? Well, that's because when the monks came over from Germany, actually Bavaria, it was its own country back when we first came over. When we came over from Bavaria, we had a plan. And the plan for a monastery was that it centered around a farm. The farm was the economic engine that drove things. The monks would arrive with a bunch of what we call lay brothers. So not every monk goes around wearing one of these collars. You know, some of them will just be straight black. That's, you know, they become monks, but they decide, no, I don't want to be a priest. I just want to work. And hey, more power to them. Someday, you know, it doesn't seem so bad. Now, it doesn't mean that priests don't work. But you know the deal. So the lay brothers would go out and they would just clear the land, build the buildings, and start farming. And that would start up the engine, so to say, of making money. And then then they build the monastery, and by the monastery they'd build a school. And then they would draw in the young folks. It was single sex education back then. So we'd draw in all the young boys into the school, and then we'd start teaching them from the local farm communities. And then from those guys, we would then get to know the students, we get to know where they're from, and then we'd start to establish different parishes in the local German American enclaves around there. And so the fathers would start sending boys to the school, and then the idea is that, you know, if we can get 1 out of 20 of those boys to enter the monastery, that would help. And then from the monks, you know, from them, they'd either become lay brothers and work the farm, or they become priests, either working in the parishes or in the school. And this whole thing would be a whole system that would thrive upon each other. It's like new recruits would come in, and then we could send more people out, and then we'd reach this number in the monastery, which is usually around 200 monks, is about as big as a monastery wants to be, and then you send out another colony. So it just keeps growing like a batch of yeast. So that's the thing. Always be careful when you invite a monk around, because he might be looking to make a settlement, and then they just keep going. But something got in the way of this model, something called the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution. So, you know, farms just, you know, started to make less money, and so do the monks of St. Martin's farm anymore? No. But we do have a beautiful set of land set aside for people to come walk on our property and enjoy nature. You just don't make money farming, but you do make money in the stock market. So that's another that's another thing. So we were all set to start our farm in Dryad, later to build the monastery and the school. But then something happened. Right here in beautiful Olympia. Meanwhile, in Olympia, this dapper young man right here, Answorth Hardaway Chambers, he was a successful businessman who held a controlling interest in the gas and electric light works, was director of the First National Bank, business manager for the Hotel Olympia, and a regular all-around philanthropist. Okay, that's his resume. He was also a politician, a big politician in the Democratic Party. This is the history that doesn't get told. Now then, and also, he started off as a butcher. A butcher. But, you know, he was born here. He's a native person. His parents came out in the 1850s, and he really wanted to see this area succeed. But, you know, he was also a man of the people, so to say. You know, he was born here. He wanted to look out for local people, and he was very involved and that led him to get involved not only in business, but also in politics. He served 3 consecutive terms as the mayor of Olympia from 1886 to 1888. And, you know, if you think about it, not bad for a guy who started off as a butcher. And then in 1890, when we became a state, he ended up being elected as the legislative representative for Olympia in the Democratic Party. You know, he was keenly interested in Olympia because people in Olympia were quite scared that they wouldn't be selected as the capital. And why not? Tacoma, city of destiny. And of course, then there's Seattle, of course. Spokane thought that they were going to be the big thing, taking in all the grain from the Palouse. A lot of people wanted the capital. And it's people like A.H. Chambers who worked hard behind the scenes to make sure that Olympia kept the capital here, and he wanted to see this place thrive. And part of wanting to keep this place thriving was seeing what do we lack. And back in 1887, he approached the Sisters of Providence about building a hospital here because there wasn't a hospital in Olympia. 1887, no hospital. And he saw these things as things that we need as a city if we're going to establish ourselves. And so, was he Catholic? No. He wasn't. But he saw that, people weren't going to get it done on their own. And he saw what Mother Joseph was doing in the area. And so he invited her in, and they built the hospital where? On Capitol Hill. In fact, state legislators used to sleep in the open beds in the hospital. Now, that's not a bad thing because, sisters make a little extra income, but they also build up some goodwill with the people who are making laws. In fact, now this might boil you a little, but there was a law passed that Providence hospitals don't have to pay taxes. It was passed by the legislature, and for their gratitude for having this building right next, so close and convenient for them. It's just one of those little things that you scratch our back, we'll scratch your back. Politics doesn't change much, does it? And there you go. Now then, a little further about Olympia. So, Father Charles Clausens, who is the diocesan priest, so sort of like just your normal priest under a bishop, your regular priest, not a priest that goes around wearing this stuff, a regular priest. He was approached by A.H. Chambers and him kind of got together and they talked about things and they realized, okay, we got the hospital, but we don't have a school. We need to have a real school here in this area. And so A.H. Chambers approached Clausens. Clausens thought it was a great idea. He was already working at helping this Providence sisters get established here and getting the hospital going. And, they wanted, and they were hearing that the monks were looking for a place for the school. And so they said, well, they shouldn't be in Dryad. They need to be here in Olympia, right? Yeah, of course. And we can make that happen. And so A.H. Chambers goes and he talks with the state land commissioner saying, you know what? I bet you have some land close to here for Olympia to make this happen, don't you? And I'll remember this favor as well, right? Right. And so he knew about some land near the town of Woodland, which is now Lacey, named after the land donated by Isaac Woods for the train station. Now, in our early literature, it is, the college is said to have been established in Woodland, Post Office, Lacey. Well, eventually it became Lacey, and then it became Olympia, and then Lacey again. That's more of a story than I'm going to tell today. Now then, and the land was actually set aside for education. So hey, go figure. But set aside for public education. So basically, our money, when we went to purchase this, actually went to fund public education, which is, kind of ironic if you think about it. But there you go. We got private education land, and the money, the profits went to pay for public education. And our president was asking me, well, could you do some digging to find out if that went to Washington State? I was like, I don't have that much time unless you want to give that to me. So, but that's a future project for someone to do. Now then, and then so A.H. Chambers and Father Clausens, they brought in Father Wolfgang and put their arm around him and say, hey, let's take a little trip out to Woodland. Let's take a look at this property. And, he took a look at it, and he was impressed. He thought, okay, here's some land right next to a train station, with the main source of transportation. It's pretty nice. And us monks, we love building on hills. So I was over in Europe last fall, and I got to visit the first monasteries established in the West, over in Italy. And the first one, Subiaco, is basically built into a face of a cliff. It's on a hill. So, and then the next one, Monte Cassino, is built on top of a hill. The Germans knew about that, and because they had a great view. I guess the Germans wanted great views back then. Yeah, and then America decided, well, we don't like you having that great view. But that's another story for another time. Now, why do we build on hills? Because of barbarians. There's barbarian hordes going all over the place. Good to have a nice, safe location, right? So, St. Martin's on top of a hill, you never know. You never know. You gotta be ready. So, hey, this is like, yes, a hill. So, it's a hill near a train station. We like it. And look how big the trees are. This soil must be so fertile for those trees to grow here. Okay, as I say, the brothers worked the land, and the fathers came up with the plans. They should have had a brother out here to say, Nein, 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 Vater, nein. Das Land, no gut, Yeah, it's, they had to find that out later. And so it was all planned out. Everything was looking rosy in 1892. But then, the Panic of 1893 hit. And I know, it was like, for instance, okay, it's another fact. At Panic 1893, yeah, there was an economic downturn. Okay, Father, next slide. But the thing we don't quite realize is just how big of an event this was. Because it seems so far in the past. And in between, the Great Depression happened, which kind of blocks our vision. Because when we think of bad economic times, our mind goes to the Great Depression. But there was another big financial downturn before that. Over 100 banks failed in Washington State alone during the Panic of 1893. The people in Bellingham and Port Townsend couldn't get any cash. They had to make their own cash because no one had money. Imagine that, having to come up with your own currency. It'd be like all of us having to start using Bitcoin right now. Or walking around with gift cards. It just, so, and this, and this is the place, and this is the time in which the monks decided to come out and found a new monastery of great economic downturn. And I say, now what happens when a panic happens? Are people building stuff normally? No. What was the industry here that was making us boom? Lumber. What do you think happened? Yeah, it went downhill. Less need for lumbers, less need for mills. And so when the people of Olympia heard about these monks coming out, a few of them were pretty excited about it. It's like, hurrah, the monks are coming to build schools. You know, those monks, they bring out Germans with them. They're going to found a German colony here, 200 or 300 German immigrants here. We can, you know, they're going to need homes, and they're going to need to buy stuff. Because, you know, people were just desperate for good news. And so there was a bit of sense of support for the monks coming out here, because there was a bit of hope. But there was also other sentiment at work as well. And that was good old anti-Catholic sentiment. Now, in July of 1893, the papal envoy, his name was Archbishop Francesco Satoli, came out in July 1893 making a tour of the Pacific Northwest. He stopped in Spokane, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, and then down to San Francisco. You know, this visit of his, it spooked people, because Catholics showed up in big numbers. Now, a lot of the normal Protestant community didn't realize how many Catholics were in their midst, because, you know, we just kind of blend in sometimes, you know? You know, you just can't spot him. It's like, he looks Catholic. You know, they didn't realize is that all these laborers that they were bringing in, they didn't quite know what religion they were, and if they do, well, that was just, you know, that's just our maid, or that's just a lumberjack. There's just a few of them. Well, they all came out to welcome the Archbishop out to their town, and they were startled. And Satoli didn't help out because he always spoke in Italian, and he had to have an English interpreter. It's like, and so this brought up a lot of mixed feelings in them. Now, not to get too political here, but imagine if Vice President Pence came out, okay? And all of a sudden you see 10,000 red baseball caps there to visit him in downtown Olympia. Do you think you think a lot of people in Olympia would be comfortable with that? No, they just say, I don't know my community. This doesn't feel right to me. I don't feel safe anymore. That's how people that's how people felt back then. Because there's this idea that, you know, the Catholics were against public education. Now, there's a reason behind sort of Catholic suspicions to public education, not to be too much of a, you know, defender of our system, but, you know, back then the idea was that we'll take in these immigrants, and then we want them to go to our public schools, and then between the rock of the Bible, King James Bible, and the rock of public education, we can grind the Catholicism out of them. And so they can become truly American citizens. Now, the idea, you know, the idea that spooked them the most was that this guy represented a foreign power, and that a United States citizen needs to be all in with the government of the United States, and you can't have any foreign allegiances. Now, our defense has always been, we listen to the Pope in matters of faith and morals. We listen to, whatever government we're under for all the rest. And that's the way we consider ourselves to be good citizens as well as good Catholics. We can have both. But in the meantime, Catholic bishops were going to the law court saying, we need you to remove the Bibles from public schools because we don't want our children being taught out of King James Bibles by a teacher who's going to give them Protestant instruction. And it seems kind of odd, It's just a bishop asking, don't have Bibles in schools. It just seems, what? But if you understand it in the light of that was the plan for making Catholics less Catholic, it does make you kind of understand. And so the church was, very oddly, in those days, all about separation of church and state. And so, because people were getting spooked at this time, they formed what became known as the American Protective Association. And this was their concerted effort to try to promote America. Now, once again, I could probably imagine these folks as being somewhat like the Tea Party, but it's not always that clear. It's not a one-for-one idea. But they did have so their 13-point they have 13 main principles for this organization. First of all, true loyalty to true Americanism. They were nationalists. I know this. I know it's kind of weird. This is this was over 100, more than 125 years ago. Sometimes things come back. APA is not a party. There is no authority above that of the United States government. Religious liberty does not allow for sectarian schools. Those Catholics, those Lutherans, they need to stop opening their own schools, because these Lutherans, these Catholics need to become Americans. Free public schools are the best place for the education of American children. No public treasury for an institution not under civic control. Sounds reasonable. No tax exemption for private property. Sisters, you shouldn't have got that tax exemption for your hospital. No enlistment of non-citizens in the military. Restriction on immigration in order to protect citizen laborers. 7-year residence before citizenship. No voting rights unless you are a citizen. End of laxity enforcing naturalization laws. All hospitals, asylums, and reformatories must be open to public inspection. That was because they thought that there was some malfeasance going on in those Catholic hospitals. They kind of thought that the priest would pay their visits and then stay for the night. And I don't think I need to elaborate any further. That was what was being said. So, and then legislation should never favor one section of the population. So some of their ideas sound reasonable, but there is sort of a bit of fear behind all of it. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Fear is understandable, but people always, as I try to tell our students at St. Martin's, you always need to see the bigger picture of what's going on. And just say, am I acting out of fear? And any time you're acting out of fear, you're acting out of a bad place. And I find that to be pretty good advice. But this was what was going on. People in Olympia founded a chapter here because they were spooked by this archbishop's visit to their area. And they said, we need to preserve ourselves because America's changing too fast. We're letting in all these immigrants, and we don't think these immigrants want to be included into the American project. We need to protect ourselves. And so, the president of this organization, this is W.H. Traynor, came out right after the archbishop. He planned this. So the archbishop came through, and then he came through on the recruiting tour. Just basically, did that scare you? Well, it should have scared you. And I've got a plan for how we can protect ourselves. And so he came out here on a recruiting mission. And in early 1894, he formed a council right here in Olympia. George Washington Van Holsen of Tacoma was named the state president, and he was a lawyer and a judge at the time. So it wasn't just those people; it was people who were important as well. Now then, but was everyone impressed with that? No. Washington newspapers did not support the APA. Olympia newspapers didn't because, hey, I don't care if they're Catholic. We need people out here. The Seattle PI, for example, was called by the APA a sheet of the papacy. You know? So things got a little hot and, little statements were being made. And then the APA, to sort of counteract that, they had some former priests come out, with their wives and to talk in meetings in Tacoma about just how bad the Catholic Church was. It was just sort of like, get embittered people to talk about how bad things are. And then to try to organize opposition to Catholic hospitals and Episcopal hospitals as well, because, as I say, all of these places should be under public control. This was the atmosphere in which they entered into. Now then, Abbot Bernard, who thought this was a great idea, even despite the economic stuff, despite the social situation. He came out in September of 1893. He visited the Dryad property and says, yeah, okay, this is nice. He then visited with Father Clausens, the priest down in Olympia's St. Michael's Parish, and with A.H. Chambers in Olympia. And, they went out to the site of St. Martin's together because, he's seen this land in Dryad. Now then, Abbot Bernard, see this land. And they went out, took the train, and they stopped off, and they climbed the hill, which St. Martin's is now sitting on, and seeing the view from the top, Abbot Bernard proclaimed, right here, my college will stand. He then chose the name of St. Martin's for the new foundation. Abbot Bernard, he loved naming things. So, now St. Martin, he was St. Martin of Tours, the Roman soldier who cut his cloak in half. He was a saint well admired by St. Benedict, and so there's a St. Martin Chapel at Monte Cassino. They had to rebuild it after the Americans did a really bad remodeling job. So anyway, but there is a St. Martin's chapel at Monte Cassino. So he felt, let's have a St. Martin's here, and that's how we got our name. Then Mr. John Byer, then mayor of Olympia, joined with other businessmen in supporting the new foundation of this college in Olympia. And they collected $1,600 despite the cash crunch at the time, and used it in exchange for the monks' Dryad properties. So they said, okay, we've gathered this much cash together for you to purchase your new land. And then in exchange, deed us over the Dryad property. We made out pretty good in that exchange, by the way. So they had cash. And now it was time for the auction. Now then, the Olympia chapter of the APA had a plan. We can't allow these sectarian schools in our area. We have the hospital. We have to draw the line. No monks. We're standing for America. This can't happen. We are going to outbid those monks for the property. That's our plan. We're going to stick to it, and we're going to save America despite what those stupid politicians, stupid newspapers say. We're going to do this because, it was in full keeping of their oath. They made an oath on entering the APA that they would do this, and they followed through on their oath. Now, on this day of the sale, the judge announced something that shocked the crowd. In these cash-strapped times, he announced, this sale will be cash only. Who had the cash? A.H. Chambers, the Democrat, got with the other business leaders and got the cash for them. I can't prove anything. In fact, I'd love to prove it, though, is that the mayor in A.H. Chambers had a talk with the auctioneer beforehand and said, make it cash only. Come on, you could do it. And I should also mention, why would this Democrat be so interested in bringing a bunch of Catholics out here, despite the fact that it helps the town? Votes! Because the Catholics knew who supported immigrants back then. And just the very idea of bringing in all those new voters to help build up the Democratic base, it had a role in that. And sometimes we don't like to think in those type of terms because we think it's so dirty. Don't talk about that. It's politics, Father. Don't talk about that. But that's probably the case, that there was a political motivation for starting St. Martin's University. And it's always something good to remember is that as much as I'm not big in politics myself, but it's always good to see why did this happen and start looking underneath all the stones out there and to see what's going on. Now then, cash only. And I'm sure the monks and A.H. Chamber were probably just snickering. We'll buy that parcel, we'll buy that parcel, we'll buy that parcel. And they got the whole section of land. And so they started building their building. And they got it for about $10 an acre. So, we got to remember, there was a big crash, and who had cash, right? They were able to basically get the land on the first bid. And so, on December, so the sale, they bought 570 acres of land. Because remember, we're going to start a farm here, and they eventually actually bought a little bit more land, so the land actually went up to about 1,000 acres, and the sale was confirmed May 24th, 1894. So there it was, the land was there. Now then, I'd be remiss that my confrere, Father John Scott, may he rest in peace, he wasn't able to find too much on the APA himself. And I think that's fair. And in his history, he kind of downplays that role of the American Protective Association. I respect that, but I know my confrere, and I kind of know that for Halloweens he liked dressing up as Abraham Lincoln. Okay, I'm getting some nods here. I got great confirmation, and he had his political leanings as well. And the APA was very supportive in electing their people to office, and they supported a party other than the Democratic Party. So I think he may have had some reasons for downplaying that part of our history. Now then, Abbot Bernard came back from the Pacific Northwest, and then he immediately got a cold and passed away once he got home. And then they elected a new abbot, Abbot Peter, and he came out here and just said, this place is just ideal. He saw this nice building being built, and they were able to get the lumber. They put a water tower up top there, and they were going to open up for business. They sent out a prospectus, a little advertising to the parishes in the region saying, we're open for business. Bring your boys here to school. 5 months of education is only going to cost you $100. And then if you want to learn how to play piano, that's an extra $20. Another instrument, an extra $10. We have an activities fee of $10. Boy, is that cheap, right? Everybody should be sending their young sons to our school. Everyone should be sending their young boys to our school, which is going to open September 11th, 1895, because this is such a reasonable price, and us teaching fathers from Minnesota who speak both English and German are going to be so happy to start. And one student came. God bless Angus MacDonald. God bless Angus MacDonald. Now, Father Wolfgang, he was kind of a guy who kind of got things started, but he wasn't mostly a teacher. He is a parish priest type of guy. So he went over to Shelton to found the Catholic parish there, and he had an altar boy named Angus MacDonald, and his dad was in the mercantile business. Now, if you're in the mercantile business, how do you do your business? What's the currency of exchange? Money, cash. So is it any wonder that in these cash-strapped times, the only kid who shows up actually comes from a mercantile family? Why? Because, as I mentioned, this is after the crash of Panic of 1893. People just didn't have cash. It's even though it was $100 or $2,500 in today's money for 5 months of education, people just didn't have that type of money. But think of yourself. You can send your kids to public school for free, or you can pay $2,500. Even today, that's going to make parents scratch and think about it for a bit. How am I going to do this? Now then, he was the only student for the first couple of months, but the monks kept everything going for him. They just didn't it's like, ach ja, schade, it's time to go back to Minnesota. No. They said, we're going to stick this out. We have one student, and so they just did all the classes, did everything as though everything was normal. For the first 2 months, he was the only one there. Now, economic crises don't last forever, and by the end of the year, in May 1886, they had a whole dozen students. And then things started to grow just slowly from there. And that, my friends, is how St. Martin's got started. It is. And was it easy? No. It sounds easy that monks came out from Minnesota in 1895 to found a school. And everyone knows that schools are good things. But look around a little, and you see that anytime you involve human beings in any activities, there is a colorful story behind it. Economics, prejudice, fears, hopes, desires, even politics. It all gets into the story. And I think, any one of us, because we're human beings, we love stories. History, at its end, isn't just facts. It's stories. It tells us who we are as a people. And so I'd invite everyone here to take an interest in history, and history that you may not think you're interested in, because in each one of these, you'll find a little bit about your story and how some stories keep coming back to us over and over again. Thank you.
Maybe 5 more minutes of question and answer.
Okay.
We got started a little bit early, but we do have about 5 more minutes if you would like to do a question answer kind of session. We can take a couple of questions anyway for Father Tynan.
I'll do my best to answer them, but as I said in the beginning, I am not a historian by trade, though I do read Latin. Kinda. Well, if you do want to know more about our story, this is our 1945 history. This is the 50-year history in between the years. Now, why am I showing you this from 1945? Well, I actually think this is one of the best illustrations of our early history. Does it tell you everything? Not everything, but I think it's a good, solid introduction. And you can, this is available for anyone to read. Just come to the St. Martin's library and just ask that you can read it. Now, a lot of these copies are archival. What I'm holding in my hand, I am going to donate to the Lacey Museum as well, so they have that as well. So I think it's important for them, and ourselves as being members of the same community. Now then, we also have our 100th anniversary history as well, a place called St. Martin's. This was put together by Father John Scott, and it brings us a little further up the line. So it's a good book. It mostly tells the story of the school more than the monks. But to tell you the truth, the school in the monks were kind of it's kind of like this. For the school was the monks were the school for about the first 75 years. And then, the episode with the American Protective Association, I would suggest this book from the University of Washington Press, an episode in Anti-Catholicism, the American Protective Association by Donald L. Kinzer. And I think it's a pretty good, I know it doesn't look exciting because it doesn't have a fancy cover, but I think it's a good read because it helps us understand a little bit more about our times in history as we go through some of the same questions and challenges as they did over 125 years ago. Oh, I do see a hand. Where is Dryad? It's
on the road to PL and going out the highway to Raymond and South Bend. Yeah, it's on that main highway going out to PL. So, yes.
Yeah. So the monks, some of us, so we have an agreement with the school that anytime a monk is qualified for a job, the monk may have the job. That's probably how I got to be a librarian when I arrived. So yeah, there were some sore feelings like, well, Father Peter, you didn't have to go through a job interview like I did. I say, yeah, because I can't go anywhere else to work. I'm kind of have this vow of stability that I've got to stay here. So what happened was that after John Scott was the president, we realized we just don't have a qualified monk to be a president. And so we realized we have to go to lay people to run our school because we kind of made a hash of things. Okay, thank you. I'm not scandalizing anybody. Good. We kind of made a hash of things from about 65 to 75. Yeah, and believe me, the monks weren't capable. We just didn't have the skill set to run the school any longer. We just didn't have the right men to do it. We have people who are able to be professors, but that's a whole different thing than being able to provide proper leadership for an institution of higher education. We were making very bad strategic decisions at the time. I worked in the archives, I love the monastery. I love my fellow monks. I've worked in the archives. I've seen the evidence. They made bad decisions, and I think in all humility we realized we just can't do this anymore. We turned it over to a lay president, and most of our board of trustees are lay people. Now we do have seats on our board of trustees. We have strong influence. So it's a partnership now.